Welcome to Pod Trendcast, where we break down the biggest trends shaping our world today.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we have a custom mission, really focusing in on a very specific and, let's be frank, sensitive historical topic.
Absolutely.
We're exploring a critical analysis of how the hijab mandate originated, and we're drawing this entirely from one particular source, a detailed YouTube video.
That's right. The Origin of Hijab in Remembrance of Mahsa Amini.
Yeah.
And it's quite focused.
Very
It
focused.
zooms in almost entirely on just two verses in the Qur'an. Surah Al-Ahzab, chapter 33, specifically verses 53 and 59.
Okay.
And the core idea, the thesis from this source, is that the rules about veiling and separation weren't, about some inherent spiritual value or respecting women. No, it argues they were reactions, responses to some very specific, kind of messy, and honestly quite mundane social problems happening at that time.
That's a really different perspective than you often hear. So our mission today is to unpack the historical events and the specific hadith this source uses to make that case. The claim being that these orders ended up severely limiting women's freedom, creating rules that the source itself calls misogynistic. We're just synthesizing what this analysis claims about how it all happened. So, okay, let's start where the source starts. The claim about Qur'an 33.59, that's the verse telling believing women to draw their cloaks close around them. And surprisingly, the analysis links this to sanitation.
Yeah, it sounds odd at first, but the source really tries to ground this in a physical reality. It points to hadith, Sahih Bukhari specifically, describing Medina back then.
Okay.
The key thing, the houses, even the Prophet's wives' houses, didn't have proper restrooms. So the women had to go out at night.
Go out where?
To a place called al-Manasi, this big open area near Bakia, to, answer the call of nature, as the source puts it, relieve themselves.
Right, a basic human need. And this is where Umar ibn al-Khattab comes into the picture, according to the source.
Exactly. The analysis claims Umar found this whole situation, seeing the wives go out, he found it embarrassing.
Embarrassing for him.
Apparently. Yeah. The source says he complained to Muhammad about it, repeatedly, suggesting the wives should be veiled so, and this is the crucial part according to the source, so nobody could see their bodies when they defecating.
Wow, okay. That's quite specific.
And the source highlights a specific incident to really drive this home. It says Umar actually followed one of the wives, Sauda bin Salma, one night when she went to al-Manasi.
He followed her.
Yes, and confronted her. Reportedly said something like, "By Allah, you cannot hide yourself from us."
Oh, that sounds intimidating.
Well, Sauda was apparently quite upset. She went straight back and told Muhammad what happened.
So the source's conclusion from this sequence of events
is that Muhammad eventually kind of gave in to Umar's pressure after this confrontation. And that's when Q 33.59 was revealed.
And the source is very clear about the motivation it attributes here.
Very clear. It argues Umar wasn't asking for a veil out of respect. It was disgust, according to this analysis. Disgust at seeing women tending to their basic bodily needs out in the open.
Which leads to that rather striking analogy the source uses.
It does. Because if the problem was covering up this basic biological act in a place without facilities, the source concludes the hijab's original purpose was like a portable outhouse.
A portable outhouse.
That's the term the source uses. A covering needed because there were no bathrooms. And the implication the source draws for today is pretty direct. If that was the reason, then modern plumbing makes that original function obsolete.
That's definitely a provocative interpretation based on that reading of the hadith. So the source's argument starts with disgust and practicality, not spirituality.
A very different starting point.
Right.
And the analysis doesn't stop there. It broadens its critique of Umar quite significantly.
Right. It really digs into Umar's alleged attitudes, arguing he was someone who, quote, hated women. And it uses other specific citations to back this up.
Okay, so how does it build that case?
Well, the first example it uses directly challenges the idea that the veil is always about respect or, piety.
How so? This sounds like it gets complicated. It does. The source cites a record, Musannaf ibn Abi Shayba, describing Umar actually flogging a maidservant, a jariyah.
Flogging her for what?
For wearing a veil. And the reason the source gives is Umar telling her specifically, do not resemble free women.
Wait, so he wants the Prophet's wives veiled for sanitation reasons, according to the source, but then beats a slave woman for veiling.
Exactly, the contradiction the source wants you to see.
So the source is arguing the veil, at least initially, or in Umar's view, wasn't universal. It was about status.
Precisely. It was a marker separating free women from enslaved women,
Yep.
not about universal modesty. The source suggests that when this covering later became more broadly applied, it carried Umar's sort of control-based hierarchical thinking with it.
Okay, a status marker. And then the source connects this idea of control to actual violence.
Yes, directly. It brings up another hadith, this one from Imam Muwatta Malik. It describes a situation where a man asks Umar for advice.
About what?
His wife had tried to stop him from being intimate with his slave girl, his Jariya. She did this by suckling the slave girl, claiming that kinji created a kinship, like mother-daughter, which would forbid intimacy.
Okay, a complex family dynamic. And Umar's advice.
According to the source, Umar's response was, well, blunt and harsh. He supposedly told the man to beat your wife and go to your Jariya again.
He told him to beat her.
Yes, and dismissed the kinship claim, saying suckling only counts for babies. So the source uses this to argue Umar actively promoted violence to maintain male dominance and control over women.
That's a very strong claim. And the source doesn't just leave it with Umar, does it? It tries to link this back to Muhammad.
It makes that leap, yes.
Yeah.
It connects Umar's alleged views and actions to Muhammad by citing that well-known saying, a man will not be asked as to why he beat his wife.
Ah, right.
So the source puts these pieces together and concludes that Muhammad and Umar were, in its words, two of a kind, that they both used violence for control, and that the hijab order ultimately emerged from this mindset, from what the source calls their shared hatred towards women.
Okay, so that covers the source's argument about Q33.59, the cloaks, linking it to sanitation status and alleged violence. Let's shift to the other key verse the source focuses on, Q33.53, the one about speaking to the wives from behind a curtain.
Right, and here the source shifts the context entirely. It argues this verse came about because of personal dynamics, specifically Muhammad's own jealousy.
Jealousy. How does the source frame that?
It uses sources like al-Suyuti's Asbab al-Nuzul Qur'an, the reasons for revelation. The story it highlights involves Talha ibn Ubaidillah. He was Aisha's cousin, and he was apparently chatting with her one day.
Just talking.
Just talking. But the source claims Muhammad saw this, didn't like it, and basically told Talha, don't talk to my wife alone again. It frames it as jealousy.
And how did Talha react to being told that?
According to this analysis, Talha got angry, really angry.
Okay.
And the source quotes him saying something quite defiant as he left, basically that he'd just wait until Muhammad died and then he would marry Aisha.
Wow, that's provocative, saying he'd marry the prophet's widow.
Extremely provocative at the time. And the source argues this threat was the direct trigger for the revelation of Q33.53.
Which did what exactly?
Two key things. First, it told followers they must speak to the wives from behind a curtain, creating separation. Second, it explicitly forbade anyone from ever marrying the prophet's widows after his death, declaring them their mothers for all believers.
So the source sees this not just as protecting the wives, but as what?
As Muhammad reacting out of jealousy and a desire to control his wives, even after his death, preventing anyone else from marrying them. The source interprets the curtain mandate as part of this control.
And that's where the other analogy comes in.
Exactly. The source calls the resulting hijab or separation a portable jail.
A portable jail.
Yeah, arguing it was a punishment, effectively, driven by Muhammad's alleged jealousy meant to isolate the wives. And the source connects this to another verse, Q33.33, which tells the wives to essentially just stay at home. It builds a picture of increasing restriction.
So again, the source is tracing these major rules back to very specific, very human, and frankly quite negative emotions and conflicts discussed in the first case, jealousy and control in this one, not divine principle as the primary driver.
And interestingly, the source does bring up another context, sometimes discussed for that first verse, Q33.59, the one about the cloaks.
Okay, what's that?
It acknowledges that some traditional commentaries, like Tafsir Tabari and Ibn Kathir, mention harassment.
Harassment back in Al-Manasi.
Yes. The idea that when the wives went out at night, they weren't just, potentially seen by people like Umar, but they were sometimes actively teased or harassed by some rowdy young men.
Okay, so that sounds like a more protective reason for covering. How does the source handle that explanation?
It focuses on the solution chosen. The analysis argues that Muhammad, as the leader, could have dealt with the harassers directly, punished the young men, stopped the behavior.
Makes sense.
But instead, the source claims the order came down for the wives to cover themselves, to wear the hijab, referring to Q33.59, so they'd be recognized as virtuous and not be harassed.
Ah, so the source sees that as shifting the blame.
Precisely.
Huh.
It argues this put the burden entirely on the women. Cover up so you don't get harassed, rather than stopping the men from harassing.
It's the blame the victim argument, essentially.
And that's exactly how the source frames it. And it notes this covering could be quite extensive, sometimes even including the eyes, which obviously impacts mobility, eyesight, everything.
And the source's overall critique of this approach.
It's pretty blunt. It states emphatically that just covering women, a veil or hijab, doesn't actually stop harassment or guarantee safety.
What does, according to the source?
Education. Teaching men to respect women. The source insists that's the real solution, one it claims was ignored in favor of controlling women's appearance and movement.
Now, to really emphasize this idea of lost freedom, the source brings in a very significant figure from early Islamic history, Khadija.
Yes, Muhammad's first wife. The source uses her as a stark contrast, a kind of before picture, to show what women's lives were like or could be like before these mandates it's been discussing.
What aspects of Khadija's life does it highlight?
Her independence and her power, basically. She's presented as this incredibly successful businesswoman in pre-Islamic Mecca. She ran a major trade and transportation company.
She was Muhammad's boss initially, right?
Effectively, yes. And she supported him financially for their entire 25-year marriage. Crucially, the source points out, her wealth also supported the whole early Muslim community. She was a pillar.
And running a business like that back then
meant being out in public. Dealing directly face-to-face, as the source says, with employees, suppliers, trade partners, most of whom would have been men. She had to be visible and active.
Okay, I see where the source is going with this.
Right. The analysis then asks you to consider, could Khadija have run her business under the rules that came later?
The restrictions the source has been attributing to Umar and Muhammad.
Exactly. Things like not being alone with non-relative men, needing permission maybe for a career. That instruction to just stay at home from Q33.33, the source argues these rules would have completely crippled her ability to operate.
It would have shut down her business, essentially.
That's the argument. It would have stifled her influence, her wealth, everything that actually enabled her to support early Islam so significantly.
So the contradiction the source presents is huge. The faith's most vital early supporter operated in a way that the faith's later rules, according to this analysis, would forbid.
That's the core of the contrast. And it leads to the source's final, quite dramatic conclusion about freedom, that Khadija thrived and was respected in Mecca because the pre-Islamic pagan society there, in the source's words, upheld her freedom and rights. And the source claims Muhammad himself later revoked those kinds of freedoms with what it calls misogynic orders. So if we pull it all together, this specific analysis we've been exploring pins the origins of the hijab mandates, both the cloak and the curtain, on basically three things. None of them spiritual, all reactionary.
Right, let's recap.
First, Umar's discussed about sanitation leading to a practical, almost utilitarian covering. Second, Muhammad's personal jealousy over Talha, leading to separation and control even after death.
Okay.
And third, the response to harassment, which the source frames as blaming the victim rather than stopping the perpetrators.
And the source doesn't just leave this in the past, it draws a direct line to the present day.
Absolutely. It explicitly states that because these orders became embedded in religious law, the consequence today is that millions of women face compulsory veiling.
With potentially severe consequences for refusal.
Yes. The source mentions face slashing, acid attacks, killings, imprisonment, and it specifically invokes the tragic death of Mahsa Amini as a direct, contemporary example of the deadly enforcement of these rules.
It's a heavy conclusion. So for our final thought, something for you, the listener, to really chew on after hearing the source's perspective.
Consider Khadija again. This powerful woman whose business dealings, conducted freely in public, were fundamental to supporting Muhammad and the very beginnings of Islam.
Right.
Now, if you take the source's argument seriously, that later rules within Islam systematically restricted exactly that kind of public economic freedom for women, what does that imply? What does it mean for our understanding of the earliest Islamic community if its most crucial supporter operated in a way that its own subsequent rules would seem to make impossible? It definitely forces you to look at that early history and those rules in a potentially different light.
Thanks for listening to Pod Trendcast. Stay curious. Stay questioning.